Okay, so the last topic I want to touch on, having to do with clearance, is that if we take the clearance of a particular solute and we compare that to the GFR, which can be determined by measuring inulin clearance or creatinine clearance, then that can give us an indication of what the kidneys did with that solute. Okay, so what I mean is this. Let's take a look at these questions, okay? So what is it going to mean if the clearance of X is equal to the clearance of inulin? What does it mean if the clearance of X is less than the clearance of inulin? What does it mean if the clearance of X is greater than the clearance of inulin? Take a moment, hit pause, think about these questions, and then we'll come back to them. Okay, so let's go through these one by one. So we already know if the clearance of X is equal to the clearance of inulin, then that's going to mean that X is neither secreted nor reabsorbed. Okay, so we already established that that's the case for that basically for substances that are neither secreted nor reabsorbed, their clearance is going to be equal to GFR, which is the same as the clearance of inulin. Okay. What about if the clearance of our molecule X is less than inulin clearance? Well, if our clearance of X is less than inulin clearance, what that means is we are excreting less of our molecule than we are of inulin. So that means overall we reabsorbed X, molecule X, okay? Finally, what if clearance of X is greater than inulin clearance? In that case, what that means is we got rid of more X, right? We have excreted more X than we have inulin. And that means that overall, we had a net secretion of our molecule X, okay? I do want to point out that these comparisons are only going to tell us about the net renal handling of a solute, so what the kidneys did with that solute overall. We can't tell, like, whether there was some secretion and then some reabsorption. We only know that overall, if we were to add up everything that happened over the course of the tubule, we had a net reabsorption or a net secretion of that molecule, okay? Okay, so let's apply this principle that I just went over. These are really the same examples as you saw before, but what I'd like to do is to use that principle of comparing our clearances to determine the renal handling of our solutes, okay? So looking over here, this is kind of our control condition. Inulin clearance is 100 milliliters per minute, which means that GFR is 100 milliliters per minute, okay? If we compare that to glucose, which has a clearance of 0 milliliters per minute, what does that say about how the kidneys handled glucose? Think about that for a moment. Okay, so it means that glucose was reabsorbed, right? So remember, if the clearance of our molecule is less than the clearance of inulin, that means that the molecule was reabsorbed. And that is what is illustrated here in this diagram. Okay, next example. How did the kidneys handle this solute, right? So urea clearance is 50 milliliters per minute. If we compare that to inulin clearance, what does that say about what the kidneys did? Okay, so again, we see a net reabsorption, right? So this number is less than this number, which means that some urea must have gotten reabsorbed along the way. And that is illustrated in this figure. And last one, looking at penicillin. Penicillin had a clearance of 150 milliliters per minute. We're going to compare that to inulin clearance. And what does that tell us? Think about that for a second. Okay, so it tells us that we had net secretion of penicillin, right? So this number is greater than this number, which means that extra penicillin was added to the tubule for excretion from the body. Okay. All right, so that's basically it for this set of lectures. I want to close by reminding you that this process of comparing these numbers to each other, clearance of a particular solute to GFR, is only going to tell you about the net handling of solute, right? So for instance, penicillin might have been reabsorbed a little bit and secreted a little bit, reabsorbed, secreted, but overall we had net secretion of penicillin, and that is what is reflected when we do this comparison.